take garbage and make it shine. This whole project is asinine. Waste some time with me, I can guarantee this old junk will soon toe the line.
We're polishing turds, mediocrity curd. I can't find the words, this song is absurd. We're polishing turds, we're polishing turds.
All right, you guys ready for some real good stuff doing? It's time for a new episode of Real Good at Doing Stuff, Polishing Turds. I think this is like the 9th episode of Polishing Turds. And today we're going to work a little more on the old butt nugget here. Get her a little more polished up, ready for a big debut back on the dyno at some point. But today we've got the block pretty much machined the way we want it, ready to go together. Cranks balanced, heads ported, a bunch of stuff's done. But anyhow, we're kind of at the point where we can go ahead and start assembling this thing a little bit. So that's what we're going to cover today. And we may not get it all done in one episode. There's a lot to assembling a motor. And some of this you may see Jay putting some of this together. Me part some of it, who knows. But anyhow, we're going to cover some assembly stuff. Before we get started, I need to remind you guys to like, share, and subscribe. I see some of you guys have not been doing that, and it really upsets me. So you need to do that, or else you may not ever find out how much power this motor makes. And then how are you going to get by day to day? I don't know. So anyhow, subscribe and whatnot to the channel, and you won't miss anything, hopefully. You never know with the YouTube algorithms. You might miss it anyhow. But anyhow, it'll help if you subscribe. And it'll help me make me zillions of dollars. So anyhow, let's take a look at the process of putting this little small block Chevrolet together and see where that goes. Alright, the first thing we're going to do with this block, you're actually not going to see because we didn't video it, but that is to clean the ever-loving snot out of it. With engine building, cleanliness is next to godliness. That's the real deal. Like, you really need to get things clean. Especially certain places down in the oil galleys, you know, anything that's in there is going to go through the bearings immediately because it's not going to get filtered first. It's already after the filter. All right, so well, it goes without saying, but you kind of can't overdo it with the cleaning. And it's a little bit of it's kind of a tedious job, but it needs to happen. All right, the next thing we're going to do is also a dumb job. I just hate doing it, but it's just something you have to do. And that's put cam bearings in. It's no engine builder's favorite thing to do that I know of. But anyhow, we got to knock these in. Cam bearings, unlike the main bearings or the rod bearings, are one piece, and they're press fit in the journal, which means that the hole that they go in is slightly smaller than the bearing itself. So the press is what's going to hold it in there. And I use this device to knock these things in. And first thing, of course, is make sure that your surface behind the bearing is clean. I've already done that. We're going to put a little bit of lube behind this guy to ease the installation. Don't want to do anything dry here for obvious reasons. Slide this in. I usually do the back bearing first and work my way to the front. Need a wrench to hold the bearing on the installer. Tighten it into place. Ease up on the where it needs to go. Use this cone in the front to kind of line things up, make sure you're straight, and start tapping her in. Got a long ways to go. Sometimes you got to go in and out a few times to get your depth right. It's easy to keep going. If you go too far, you got to take the thing off the stand and come in from the other side, which is a bunch of work. So we want to just sneak up on it. Probably call that good. Alright, there's number 5. These bearings, and any bearings, usually they'll have a number on the tag here that tells you what part number goes in what hole. On a lot of motors, the bores are different size, therefore the bearings got to go in a specific spot. You can't screw that up. Not all motors, sometimes motors have all the same, but generally speaking it's pretty common to have different sizes, so you got to get that right. Alright, now we're just going to continue the process down the line. They're all in there. One thing that is kind of important to do when you get done is make sure that you're, if you have oil holes in the cam bearings, that they're lined up with the corresponding oil hole in the block. Small block Chevrolet oils the thing kind of annually around it, so it doesn't really matter as much. But a lot of motors, you do got to make sure you got line up, and that'll help you line up the bearing center to center too. But anyhow, cam bearings are in. A lot of times the next thing I'll do is I'll slide the cam in, just make sure everything's cool. Usually it's the first thing to actually go in. So we may go ahead and slide that in and go from there. Alright, let's slide this camming shaft in here. First thing you need to do, lube up these bearings, obviously. Get them ready for the cam. And then generally speaking, after you put the cam bearings in, you need to inspect them, make sure you haven't rolled up a burr on them or anything with your tool. Make sure they went in good, or else you're going to know it when you put the cam in. Same thing, make sure your camshaft is clean already. I put some juice on the gear as well, first lobe or two. This is a solid roller, so we don't need to go crazy on getting the lobes themselves juiced up. And you want to be careful not to ding the bearing. Cam bearings, a lot of bearings are very, very soft. And if you start scraping them lobes into them, you'll take chunks out. And that'll show up as small losses in oil pressure. So the better you slide this thing in the better off you'll be. Just be careful. Some guys use handles and stuff on the camshaft. I don't. I just kind of do it the old-fashioned way. Very carefully. Sometimes one journal will kind of help the other one. And as you get to the last part here, I use my other hand to kind of guide the cam down here. Let's lube this just a little bit. Come to the end, pick it up with both hands. And in she goes. And it's super slick. You always, anytime you put any kind of shaft in a motor, you want to try to make sure it turns like you want it to. That'll tell you if you've got a problem or not. But this one turns really good. This lube is super thick and slimy, but it feels great. So now the cam's in. And that's a good check to see if we're kind of ready to keep going. You don't want to put the whole motor together and then slide the cam in if you can avoid it. Sometimes you can't, you know, but it's best to do it first so you can make sure that feels right. And I think the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and file some rings. I like to get that done, and we're also going to measure the rod journals, or get the rod bearings set up, measure them, measure the clearances there, make sure the bearings that we have are going to work before we start putting everything else in. So let's move on to rings. All right, let's file some rings. First of all, what does that mean? Why do we got to do that? Factory engines, when they're rebuilt, generally speaking, come with rings that are already gapped. And they're gapped kind of on the loose and sloppy side so that they don't cause problems, right? That's fine for most stuff, but in racing engines, we generally want that gap as tight as possible, so that there's the least amount of blow-by or leakage from the cylinder. Because of that, we use file fit ring sets, which out of the box have maybe 0 or less than 0 gap. They just, you put them in the cylinder, they butt up. If you run it like without doing something to it, it's going to instantly destroy itself in most cases. So what we'll do is we'll grind with this little grinder machine here and remove the excess ring material so we can achieve the gap that we're looking for. It's pretty simple. One thing that's important, we're using a set of total seals here. Use tons of these, which every engine builder does. They're everywhere. It's always important to check the oil ring. This is often overlooked, but slide it in the cylinder and at least confirm that you've got gap there. There's been numerous occasions where I've been messing with motors, and out of the box, these oil rings were butt. A lot of times you may not notice it until you put it on the cylinder and slide it in. But it's not good if it's buttoned up out of the box. So sometimes you have to grind your oil rings. A lot of people don't realize that, but that is a real problem. All right, once you confirm that that's all good, we're going to go to the second ring here. The second ring is a cast iron to pier ring. We're going to slide it in and just see where it's at, and I can already tell it's got less than 0. It's buttoned up right out of the box, which is fine. That's normal a lot of times, really. We're going to slide it in here, kind of zero things out, and I'm going to go ahead and take 15 or so. All right, now slide that back in the hole. We're going to use a ring squaring tool to kind of get this thing correctly in the cylinder, in the bore, so it's even everywhere around, the same depth, so it's going to give us an accurate reading. And we barely got any gap. No point in sliding my feeler gauge in here yet. Still tight. So, back on the grinder, try to square it up again. I'm going to take about 8. See where we get. Alright. Back in the bore. Feeler gauge set at 22 for now. We're still not going, but we're closer. Square it up again. It's pretty square in the cylinder. I'm going to take, let's take 3 or so. Let's see what we get. It's important to remember here that you can always grind more, but you can't put ring back on if you take too much off. So take your time. This is just kind of a time-consuming process. There's not much way around it, unfortunately. Okay, so it'll barely go, but a little tight. I just want to give it a little bump. And I bet we're good. Square it. Okay, we're good. Now that's set at 22. That's significantly tighter than a lot of the big turbo deals we do here, which is mostly what we do, you know. But it could definitely be tighter than 22 and get away with it no problem. In my opinion, this is not an area where you want to push it. You're not going to gain hardly squat from doing so. In most cases, I'd say you're probably not even going to be able to tell. So why push your luck? And this, if it's set at 22, we could conceivably get away with a small amount of nitrous going through this thing and not completely KO and everything. All right, I'm gonna push that down in the bore, and I'm gonna go ahead and do the top for the video's sake. Our top is a stainless ring, and you see it's thicker radially. These are a little harder. They take a little more time to grind. Let's see where it's at to start with. All right, it too is definitely butting up. So we're going to go ahead and cut a chunk here. One other thing real quick about ring gap. When I started building engines a million years ago, the conventional wisdom at the time was that the second ring gap needed to be much tighter than the top, and like when you got ring instructions always generally told you to do it this way. The thinking was that the second ring saw much less heat than the top, therefore it would expand less and butt later, right? Over time people figured out that that was not the best way to do things. The best way to do it is to have just as much gap. Some guys even run more gap in the second ring than the top. The reason being to keep gases or pressure building up between the top and second ring. If you have pressure buildup in there, it can cause the top ring to lift off the land, and ring seal goes out the window when that happens. It's called ring flutter generally. So anyhow, that's just a good example of how things have changed. If you'd have done it this way 30 years ago, people would have said you're doing it wrong, when actually you were right and everybody else was wrong, you know. So anyhow, that's just, like I said, a good example of how over time the right way to do things will change. All right, moving on. We got 8 brand new Compstar connecting rods here and a stack of rod bearings. We can't just stick these in the motor without checking them. So we need to torque these up with the bearings in there and check the clearance, just make sure we're okay there next. And it's pretty much very similar to the to how we did the main bearings, but a little different. But anyhow, let's torque some bearings in here, and then we'll measure them up. We got all these rods torqued up with the bearing in them. And the way we measure our clearance is basically the same way we did the mains and the line hole. Or really about the same way we do about everything around here. I'm going to take mic, and I've measured the journals here on the crankshaft. And then I'll zero this in the mic. And then I can just walk it through these bearings and see if they're where I want them to be. These are standard Kings XPs, which is a bearing I use a lot of, and our clearance is fine with these, anywhere 2.1, 2.3, all in that range. So these rods are good. Now we're going to number them, tear them down and clean them, final clean them, and hang them on the pistons, and we'll be a little closer towards sticking them in the hole. It may stop here because it's probably about all the video you can stand today from Polishing Turds, and we'll carry on in a separate one. But anyhow, subscribe, like, share, all that stuff, or else you're never gonna know what happens when we dyno this thing here in a week or two.
Polishing Turds. Polishing Turds.